The original agreement between Sugar Ray Leonard Incorporated and Angelo Dundee had long expired. The Maestro had previously returned to work the Kevin Howard and Hagler fights on the assumption that it would be under terms similar to his original arrangement. Angelo appears to have been satisfied with the paycheck he received from the Howard fight, but was plainly insulted by the $150,000 he was paid after the Hagler blockbuster. Cable television and the emerging pay-per-view industry had dramatically altered the boxing landscape in the decades since Dundee had first worked with Leonard. On one hand, Angelo was realistic enough to realize that it would be ridiculous for a trainer to expect 15 or even 10% of the profligate purses now being tossed around. On the other hand, 1% seemed humiliating. When an entreaty from his lawyer to Mike Trainer elicited no response, Dundee decided to move on. Contrary to the widespread assumption, Dundee never resigned. When Leonard decided to end retirement number 4 by coming back to fight Donnie Lalonde in 1988, Dundee was one of the first members of the old team who reached out. "I had my lawyer send Mike Trainer a letter saying that I wanted a contract," said Dundee. "This time, I wanted to know exactly how much I was being paid." Dundee never got a response. When Leonard went into training for the Lalonde fight, Janks Morton had been promoted to chief second. Dundee would never work with Ray again. Although Leonard himself must have signed off on the decision, Angelo went to his grave blaming Mike Trainer for the rift between him and Ray. Donnie Lalonde was an unlikely boxer. Uncommonly handsome, he had worked as a model, an actor, and in his spare time composed thoughtful poetry. Canadian by birth, he was managed by Dave Wolfe, the former sports writer, who had turned Boom Boom Mancini into a household name. Wolfe had packaged Lalonde as the Golden Boy years before the world had heard of Oscar De La Hoya, and turned him into a marquee prize fighter. In 1987, Lalonde had won the vacant WBC light heavyweight strap with a second-round TKO of Eddie Davis in Trinidad and Tobago. The following spring, he successfully defended it, stopping former WBA champion Leslie Stewart, a Trinidad native in Port of Spain. As a result of negotiations for the Lalonde fight, Leonard once emerged with a decided advantage. The WBC had recently joined the other sanctioning bodies in establishing a 168-pound super middleweight division. Leonard and Trainer managed to persuade Wolfe and Lalonde that history was there to be made, with the fight being the first ever to be simultaneously contested for 2 world titles in 2 divisions. The WBC happily sanctioned Leonard and Lalonde as its inaugural super middleweight title fight. Although the Golden Boy's light heavyweight title would also be on the line at Caesar's Palace, Lalonde's agreement to fight at 168 was a significant concession by the naturally bigger man. The fight took place on the 7th of November 1988 and was preceded by a junior welterweight title bout between Roger Mayweather and Vinny Pazienza. Mayweather, the champion, won rather easily, but the final bell precipitated a wild melee. An enraged Pazienza pushed past Mills Lane and continued to swing away, and both corners spilled into the ring to join the fracas. By the time security could restore order, Pazienza's 66-year-old trainer, Lou Duva, was bleeding profusely from a cut on his forehead. He was lifted off the floor, and a stretcher was summoned, but the confusion of bodies had rendered it impossible to see what happened. Some have suggested that it had been a punch from Mayweather that decked Duva. When Lane descended the ring steps, I raced over to inquire, "Mills, did Mayweather actually hit Lou?" "Yeah," drawled the referee, "but it was the 12th round. He didn't have much left." Roger clearly decked him. In the early going of Leonard's fight against Lalonde, it appeared that Sugar Ray had bitten off more than he could chew. Lalonde might not have been ranked amongst the pantheon of great or even good light heavyweights, but he was a natural light heavy. Nonetheless, while Leonard had strayed 21 pounds above what had been his optimal fighting weight, when Lalonde floored Leonard with a short right in the 4th, it looked like deja vu, in this case Kevin Howard all over again. Although Leonard bounced up and took Richard Steele's 8 count, by the time the round was over, Ray was bleeding from a cut to his nose. Okay, let's give the people what they want. Let's talk about the big one. The Ray Leonard fight.
Put it in perspective, first of all, remember I'm a light heavyweight, and this is in the 80s.
Yes.
And in the 70s, a welterweight and a light heavyweight would never even contemplate fighting, really. You know.
That's right.
So I never thought of fighting Sugar Ray Leonard ever in my life. One day I left the gym just before the Davis fight, and my trainer, Tommy Gallagher, comes up and he goes, Donnie, we're going to go for a walk and talk. And I'm like, okay, so we go walk. He goes, what I'm about to say to you, I don't want you to repeat to anybody until I tell you it's okay, but I got to ask you a question. I'm like, okay, what's that? He goes, would you fight Sugar Ray Leonard for $1 million? This is just after he beat HAGLER. And I'm like, are you kidding? Of course, I would fight him for nothing. It would just be an honor. It would be fun. I would be like, I mean, that's why I'm a fighter. I would love to fight the best, you know. But he wouldn't fight a light heavyweight puncher, would he? You know. And he was like, well, never say you would fight him for nothing again, because you're going to fight him, and you're going to fight him for a lot more money than nothing. And a lot more than $1 million. He goes, but just keep that between us, and I'll start working on it. But anyway, you know, so that's when I first heard of it. And, you know, skill aside, I just thought mathematically, what, I'm not going to hit him? He really thinks I'm not going to hit him once? But once I hit him once, it's a different fight, and I should knock him out. So, and rightfully, at 175, there's no doubt in my mind that's what would have happened. But that aside, at 168, when we did fight, I came in at 163, actually. I still felt I had the capacity to beat him. And maybe there were times I just didn't make the right decision. Like when he was hurt, I maybe should have jumped on him more. There was a lot of things I could have done different. But in the end, he's a great fighter. That's why he's one of the greatest fighters of all time. He found a way to win. And hats off to him, you know, whatever.
Well, the win actually hurt Ray in the end, because you was a light heavyweight champion, 175-pound champion. And everybody thought that, yo, if you want to beat Tommy to 4 titles or wherever it was at the time, fight the guy at his weight.
Right, right.
You know? And Floyd Mayweather, he's caught in controversy this week because he's defending his light middleweight titles and welterweight titles at 147. And he's getting similar criticism what Ray was getting. So what's your opinion on Ray doing that, and what was your feelings at the time?
Well, you know, first of all, I had been lined up to fight for the super middleweight title of the IBF 2 years previous, in '86. Yeah, against a guy named Chong Pal Park in Korea.
Yes, I remember.
He took the title from Murray Sutherland. Or maybe I was going to fight Murray, and then this guy won it, and I ended up, we talked about that, but ultimately my manager wanted me to fight here, not in Korea. And he felt that light heavyweight, you know, because the super middleweight belt then was just being kind of introduced. But I was never intimidated by the weight class. What happened is I did, for, you know, a lot of reasons, and some of it outside influences out of me, but in the end I have to take responsibility. I came in the fight too light. I came in at 163. I was wearing, if you look at the tape, I was wearing full clothes when I weighed in, because I came in so light. I didn't want them to see how light I was. Wow. And so, you know, I oversparred. I sparred 10 rounds a day, like 50 rounds a week for 7 weeks before that fight. Wow. There was a lot of sparring, a lot of running. I overran. I was just young and I felt great, and it didn't bother me, any of it. So, but in the end, I lost too much weight, and by the 4th round, I saw triple. And well, when he went down in the 4th round, the thought that went through my mind was, okay, this fight's over next time I hit him. And so I stopped doing what I had done, which led up to that knockdown, which was keep him at the end of my jab and just let him try to come in, and when he came in, just catch him. All I had to do was catch him even partially, as you saw, and I was hurt him. So all of a sudden he went down, I went, God, next time I hit him, this is over. And I kept thinking, leading up to the fight, and I would tell my manager, he's going to figure out one day what a mistake he's making fighting a light heavyweight puncher. He's gonna find a way out of this fight. It's not going to happen. I was in the dressing room. My manager was in there. Bob Dylan was in there with me. And I fell asleep before the fight. My manager wakes me up, and he goes, "You can believe the fight's going to happen. Ray's going into the ring. You got to get up." You know. And because I honestly thought he was crazy. So anyway, I was just kind of like, when he went down, I thought, next time I hit him, this is over. And I started watching the fight instead of making it happen. And he started coming on a bit. He thought, he made a good next few rounds of it. And then I went back into the zone in the 9th round, and for about 2 minutes just hit him from pillar to post. I was really weak. I didn't have a lot of my punches, but I hit him with everything. He couldn't do anything about it. He was hurt all the time. He told me later, and I knew at the time. But I was looking around for Richard Steele to stop the fight, really.
Yeah.
And Ray saw that and kind of jumped on it and threw a million punches and ended up hitting me in the larynx and crushed my larynx, and that was the end of the fight. And, what can I say? He was a great finisher, and he finished.
Sugar Ray won his 4th and 5th world titles on the same night. As when he won the junior middleweight title from Ayub Kaluli and the middleweight title from Hagler, he would abdicate the light heavyweight title without ever defending it. The super middleweight title, on the other hand, he hung on to. It would become an important bargaining chip in the next phase of his plan. Hoping to beat Leonard to the punch as the first man to win world titles in 5 different divisions, Hearns had scheduled a fight against Fully Oblajimas, Hagler's old Venezuelan foe, who now owned the WBA super middleweight title. They were to face off at the Las Vegas Hilton on the 4th of November, 3 nights before Leonard and Leonard. A few weeks before the bout, Oblajimas suffered a rib injury in training and withdrew from the bout. James Kinchin, a respectable pugilist from San Diego, with a 45, 4 losses and 2 draws record, replaced Oblajimas as Hearns' opponent, and the newly crowned World Boxing Organization agreed to recognize the Hearns-Kinchin winner as its first 168-pound champion. The WBO had yet to establish much credibility in the boxing world, but Bob Arum noted not unreasonably not to dismiss the WBO as a joke, suggested that the other organizations were not. Although Hearns built up an early lead in the 4th round, Kinchin followed a big right hand with a left hook that put Tommy on the floor. Tommy got up woozily, barely able to stand. Hearns' inability or unwillingness to clinch had cost him the first fight with Leonard, but the intervening years he had apparently learned his lesson well. He got through the round only by seizing Kinchin in what I described as a Motown death grip. "I was holding him like he was my woman," Tommy confessed afterwards. I remember when Tommy said that. Mills Lane, who had to keep prying Hearns loose from Kinchin, was not as amused, particularly when he was nearly throttled by the same stranglehold that Hearns was applying to Kinchin. After numerous warnings, the referee took a point from Tommy. "The best point that he ever spent," noted Tommy's hometown scribe, Mike O'Hara. Lane appeared to be within an eyelash of disqualifying Hearns altogether. Hearns, in any case, survived the round and ultimately the fight. Although the verdict came in the form of a narrow majority decision, Billy Graham, Cindy Barton scored it for Hearns, 115-112 and 114-112, while Larry Rosadilla had it even at 114-114. The Hitman prevailed. The victory set the stage for a long-awaited rematch with Leonard the following June. The first time they had met, each owned a share of the welterweight championship. This time, it would also be a unification bout with both the WBC and WBO super middleweight titles on the line. Leonard prepared for Hearns too in Palm Beach, less than an hour's drive north of Dundee's home in Pembroke Pines. Ray was working with his 3rd trainer in as many fights following Dundee's acrimonious departure after the Hagler fight. Janks Morton had also walked away after the Lalonde bout. Morton had moved to Phoenix, where he occupied himself with other boxers, among them former heavyweight champion Greg Page, Canadian heavyweight Donovan Razor Ruddock, amongst his charges. For public consumption, he had departed for reasons similar to those voiced by Jacobs 7 years earlier. Of what he had seen in the Lalonde fight, he had urged Ray to retire, and declined to countenance his further participation in the ring. But Janks had another problem, a Leonard associate confided. He had known Ray since he was a little boy, and he still tended to talk down to him. Ray doesn't like that. Now, to supplant Jacobs in the corner, Ray turned to a man he had known as long as any of them, Pepe Correa. Correa had helped Jacobs start the boxing program back in Palmer Park 18 years earlier. When Correa left Palmer Park for personal reasons, he says, he established an inner-city boxing club called the Latin Connection at 14th and Columbia in Washington. Among his pupils had been Simon Brown and Morris Blocker. Both of them would go on to become welterweight champions. Simon Brown also held a version of the light middleweight title briefly. Outside the District of Columbia, few boxing people even knew Correa's name before he joined the Leonard camp. And he didn't make any new converts once he had the spotlight. Not only was he replacing Angelo Dundee, a revered figure in boxing circles, but he was telling anyone who would listen that it was no great loss because he believed he was a better trainer than Dundee. Leonard was still in Palm Beach when he publicly confirmed for the first time that he and his wife had separated. The couple had actually split nearly a year earlier. But with Leonard in camp, Trainer learned that the media was looking into the story of the marital breakup. He sat down with Ray and told him, "You probably ought to announce it yourself. It's the only way you're going to keep the Washington Post out of your business," said Trainer. Charlie Brotman was instructed to issue a statement. When the item broke into print several days later, it was buried in a two-part series on Leonard, and merely mentioned in passing that the couple had separated some time earlier. Juanita and her two sons had actually visited Leonard in Palm Beach and planned to fly to Vegas to attend the Hearns fight together. It was a mutual decision, and it's been a very amicable arrangement, said Trainer, who had handled his share of divorce courses over the year. If all separations were like this, I'd be broke. For nearly 2 months, Leonard and Hearns periodically interrupted their training to appear at Aram-arranged press conferences around the country. Although their rematch had been christened The War, one of Aram's public relations geniuses had suggested that the two gladiators cast themselves as spokesmen addressing world issues. In Chicago, Leonard and Hearns announced that they were declaring war on crime, public transportation in Los Angeles, where Aram presumably was not counting on many pay-per-view buys from either the Bloods or the Crips. The theme became war on gangs. In Hearns' hometown, the subject was one nearer and dearer to many Detroiters' hearts, war on imports. "I understand Tommy's been working a lot on a bicycle," teased Leonard at one of the press stops. "But the thing about it is, people don't punch you while you're riding a bicycle going backwards. Sooner or later, his legs are going to say, 'I don't know about you, but I'm tired.' And when those legs give out, the fight is over." When Leonard described Hearns as a shot fighter, Tommy responded, "You more shot than I am." According to Trainer, the biggest mistake Hearns made was agreeing to play cards with Ray on the press tour. Ray suckered him in, and before Tommy knew what hit him, he lost $2,000 playing in between on the Caesars plane. Leonard had been guaranteed $14 million and Hearns $11 million, but Aaron predicting that closed circuit and pay-per-view revenues might gross between $60 and $80 million, which Pat Putnam said would send the boxers' purses soaring to national debt levels. Moreover, the fight was for a 168-pound title. The bout agreement called for both contestants to weigh 164, with financial penalties should either exceed that. It was probably a calculated approach. Both boxers tended to downplay comparisons between the war and their first meeting. "I don't punch that hard anymore," admitted the 33-year-old Leonard. "I don't remember shit about the first fight," said Hearns. "I've had a lot of fights since, 16 in all." Leonard remarkably had engaged in just 4. "You shouldn't even think about that fight in 81. It was a long time ago." Asked why the return bout had been so long in the making, Hearns replied, "I think he was waiting for me to slide, and after viewing my last couple of fights, he thinks it's time." But in a more pensive moment, Hearns admitted that he was still haunted by the first fight that he had with Ray. 8 years of pain with a little monster following me around is how Tommy described it. This whole thing is about payback. Leonard knows how bad I want him.